There's all the intersection. Put the connection and have looked at climate change in isolation, but it is feeding into health, into our food systems, into gender issues as well. But when you look specifically at health, we can see that the climate crisis, as it presents in famine, drought, and floods, this will affect, populations. And so it means that there will be people in crisis, whether it's injuries that result from it, whether it's the diarrheal diseases or respiratory infections that are coming up from carbon emissions and, with climate change or climate sensitive changes that are affecting health. So when we're looking at our leading diseases or disease prevalence, where we're talking about respiratory illnesses or diarrheal illnesses, there is a climate change linked to it.
What is the impact of climate change on populations on the ground when it comes to Africa?
On the ground, of course, there's the issue of immigration. We can see, people who are dying in the process of immigrating to the European countries. Why are they moving? Because their land is no longer sustaining them. It's not agriculturally viable anymore. The weather patterns have changed. The rain is not presenting in terms of the patterns as it usually has. And so there's a lot of famine and drought. And we're talking about West Africa all the way to the East Horn of Africa. On the other hand, the people who are remaining then are facing starvation and malnutrition consequently. And what does that mean for the future? Because if you're having a child or a pregnant mother who's not nutritionally fit even to carry a child, then it means that we are giving birth to children who are malnourished already, and the mother is suffering and cannot feed the child. And so what generation are we looking at? Because then the development of the child is also affected. And so we are looking at the impact as well in future generations in terms of the quality of the humans that we are producing in the region. Countries cannot be economically viable if populations are displaced and they're not working and they're not producing. Then it means that the country is also not developing and not producing enough resources to manage their population. So we're getting into a cycle of poverty. Yet when we look at climate change, in all honesty, we are only contributing 3.8% to the global gas emissions that are being produced. So this is something that is truly an injustice for Africa.
Reports show that women and girls are affected in very specific ways and in high numbers. What are your thoughts?
Gender equality still exists, and climate change is only just worsening the situation. And when we look at women are the ones who are tilling the land, producing food, managing households. They become vulnerable because they're also the most poor. And we see that almost 63% of the world poor who are women are in Africa. So you can imagine in climate change, where your land is no longer viable, how do you produce for the household? How do you even give birth to a healthy child? And the second thing, when we look at women in that vulnerable space, if they're facing famine, we have women who are walking over 6 kilometers just to collect 20 liters of water. In that pathway to getting to water, she's exposed to a lot of dangers. Whether it's wildlife or it's even raping, what we're referring to as gender-based violence is also representing as a result of climate change.
What can people do? Perhaps some small steps they can take to protect their health faced with the climate crisis.
We need to understand what climate change and what climate crisis is coming. Because when you understand the problem, then you can address the need, as it were. And of course, at community level, then we would want to move to developing resilience, in essence. And what we are looking at, of course, is looking at renewable energy resources, whether it's using better use of charcoal. For instance, we have different forms of charcoal that reduce gas emissions as opposed to the normal, how we always develop charcoal. So there are very many innovative ways in which we're doing this. There's use of solar energy as well. Different ways in which we can ensure and safeguard against famine or a failed crop. So this is also a call to governments to support and, look at climate insurance, for instance, so that when we very know that, for instance, in Africa, agriculture is very important. And when the patterns are changing, the chances of crop failure are high. Can we have climate insurance for such persons? And also just planting trees, because these are natural carbon sinkers. And of course, there has to be financed for sustainability. They have to be owned. So we must make the communities part and parcel of this discussion around managing climate crisis.